Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. 4 days to go until the election, and it's anyone's guess who makes it into the runoff. The campaign ads are coming fast and furious as candidates make their last-minute pitches.
This is about taking back our city.
Meanwhile, race takes center stage as Lightfoot accuses Vallas of dog whistle politics.
Take our city back, meaning what? To what time? And take our city back from whom?
Our members deserve transparency. Our members deserve democracy.
A group of teachers blasts the CTU over big spending on mayoral candidate Brandon Johnson. CPD brass gets an earful over failing to fire officers tied to extremist groups.
Is it acceptable to send somebody to second grade and have a teacher tell them that they were born in the wrong body?
Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis brings his culture war platform to suburban Elmhurst as crowds gather to protest outside. And in sports, NBA star Patrick Beverley comes home to make his debut for the Chicago Bulls. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Greg Hines of Crane Chicago Business, Sarah Schulte of ABC7 Chicago, Mariah Woelfel of WBEZ Chicago, and Shia Kappas of Politico. So let's get right into it. Greg Hines, Mayor Lightfoot's closing message seems to be, you can't really trust Paul Vallas because he's done and said this stuff on the right. You can't really trust Brandon Johnson because he said defund the police. You may not like me that much, but you know me. Is that how the undecideds break for her?
Maybe. Conventional wisdom right now, and it pretty much agrees with all the polls, is that Paul Vallas is going to make the runoff, for sure. That makes it a three-way race for the second place among the mayor, Brandon Johnson, and Chuy Garcia, Congressman Garcia. And I think that this mayor's problem, whatever her virtues are, she's got a record, particularly on crime, that doesn't set well with a lot of people. So she kind of needs, I think, to make the runoff, I think the mayor kind of needs the progressive vote to split pretty evenly between the other two contenders for second place, Mr. Garcia and Mr. Johnson. If it does, she comes in the middle. If one of them runs away with it and is like at 25%, then I think she has a problem.
And Brandon Johnson has been shown in certain recent polls to have been surging, Chuy Garcia trailing behind. But again, polls are just a snapshot in time. They don't really signify how things are going to turn out necessarily. Meanwhile, Mariah Woelfel, Paul Vallas is under fire for interacting on Twitter with some pretty offensive content. So tell us about some of this activity.
So this is something he said he was shocked by. His official account, which he's pretty active on, you know, with tweeting about his policies and ideas for leading the city, has come under fire for liking offensive and racist tweets. Tweets that, I mean, quite frankly, dehumanize Lightfoot in many ways. They call her Larry Lightfoot, say that she's the gnome on the 5th floor, say she's anything but human. Again, Vallas, like, sticking to this story that he was unaware of the likes and doesn't know who liked them, saying, you know, tons of volunteers have access to his account. Either way, this is either someone who worked for Vallas's campaign. It might shed light for people on who works for Vallas's campaign. All
right, so, I mean, what he's saying, he said these are abhorrent and volunteers got a hold of my account and they went and liked some stuff. Shia Kappas, who do you think these volunteers are that go on to Paul Vallas's Twitter account and say, let me like some unfavorable stuff here?
I certainly asked this morning on Playbook, if you are that person tweeting, let me know, and nobody responded, so I don't know.
So there we go. Case closed.
Yeah. And Sarah Schulte, I mean, he is having a little bit of pushback from the LGBTQ community. I mean, he has touted his record supporting that community, some groups saying not so much when you associate with folks on the far right who have been at odds with the community.
Yeah, I mean, Equality Illinois and a couple other groups are endorsing Lori Lightfoot, and they're also very upset about this ad that Paul Vallas has on the air, which actually, there's nothing false about the ad. I mean, he does talk about his record, previous record years ago, claims that he was the, you know, one of the first people to come out and provide domestic partnership benefits for CPS. Also, you know, way before it was, you know, politically popular, and also before came out for gay marriage before it was politically popular. That's what's in the ad. The thing that Equality Illinois is upset about is they said things recently. They, you know, it's kind of guilt by association. They think think that Paul Vallas, he attended some events where some far-right people were there. John Canzera, the FOP president, Jeannie Ives, Republican Jeannie Ives.
Woke Illinois. He didn't know what Woke Illinois was either. So
even though he had spoken at their events twice, correct? Not just once.
And initially defended his appearance at a Wake Illinois event, and then later, after pushback, came out.
I think we could all agree that one of the characteristics of Paul is sometimes he just charges ahead like a bull and doesn't really think. Clearly he should have figured out when he not only accepted but sought the FOP endorsement that comes with lots of strings because there's some bad people who said some nasty stuff in that organization,
including the leader who's been nowhere to be seen in recent days. He wasn't at that DeSantis event either.
No.
It does come with strings, but it also comes with votes. I mean, you have to remember that Paul Vallas is, the police and fire and a lot of in those wards on the northwest side and the southwest side who come out to vote. They're those are big wards that come out to vote.
You ought to know.
They are supporting Paul Vallas.
You ought to know it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, but you've said, Greg Hines, will the real Paul Vallas please step forward? So he does seem to have those northwest side, southwest side, perhaps more conservative voters locked up. Is he trying to play both sides of the fence here?
I think Paul is the reason that most people say that Vallas now is in good position to make the runoff is he not only has that vote on the northwest and southwest side, but he's picked up on the southern part of the lakefront, the 42nd ward, the 43rd ward, the 44th ward, big gay ward. He's trying to appeal to them, and anything that shows him to be a bigot or somebody who's maybe not on our side is going to cause him some problems. He'll need them to get the runoff. He'll definitely need them, and more like them if he makes the general to win the runoff.
And Shia Kapos, we mentioned that polls have showed Brandon Johnson making a huge surge. What do you think accounts for that?
I think because he has a lot of good ads out there that are really motivating people at a time when you're seeing fewer ads maybe from Chuy Garcia, and they're both trying to compete for that progressive vote.
And meanwhile, you heard Mayor Lightfoot in that package say that when Vallas says, take our city back, it's a dog whistle a la Bernie Epton before it's too late. Greg Hines, do you view it that way?
No, I didn't view it that way. Particularly since Lightfoot herself kind of played a racial card a few days earlier, where her campaign sent out an editorial that was done in a newspaper saying that, hey, Chicago needs a black mayor. There's only one black candidate who can win. All those other candidates ought to get out, and if you're black, you ought to vote for Lori Lightfoot. And then she said that if you're not black and you don't vote for me, you shouldn't vote at all. So, I mean, she kind of opened Pandora's box. I don't know what's in Vallas's heart, but the problem with that is it plays into this evolving thing. It goes along with the emails or whatever that, maybe there's another side of Paul Vallas. Maybe he's talking out of both sides of his mouth.
And Mariah Wolf, meanwhile, Lightfoot did have to walk back those comments about not coming out to vote at all. Is kind of an unforced error here for her?
Well, I think she's walked the comment back about equating voting for anyone but her as, just staying home and not voting. That was the intent of her original comment, is how I took it. I think she's walked that back, but at the same time still trying to paint herself as the only candidate who can beat Vallas. So therefore saying, not voting for her means you're going to get someone who you maybe didn't intend in a runoff.
And a lot of accusations flying here. Meanwhile, Chuy Garcia, Sarah Schulte, he started off kind of as a front runner here, maybe because of his name recognition, and these polls show him third or fourth, kind of barely hanging on. Disappointing showing so far?
Well, you have to remember that Chuy Garcia got into this late. Right? I mean, he was the last person to get in, so he didn't get that support that he has gotten in the previous elections, from the unions. So I think that has a lot to do with it, because then he's not able to get the money to put the ads on the air. I mean, his ads came late as well. Plus, I think that Chuy Garcia is having a problem trying to really find his base. I mean, it always has been that progressive base, and now you have Brandon Johnson cutting into it. So he's really trying to also appeal to some of the North Side Lakefront wards. Especially the ones that are, the 46th and 48th ward further north. He's really trying to appeal to those voters there.
Saying, me, because the CTU and those groups already back Brandon Johnson.
Yeah, I think that Garcia's problem to some extent is the flip side of why Johnson is doing well. He's trying to be a little bit more of a centrist. He doesn't have a very clear decisive kind of message. Whereas Brandon, if you're on the political left and you're a socialist or you're a real progressive and you believe that we need to take some money away from the cops and spend it on social programs.
He's saying the things you want to hear then.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a real clear message that for his base is going to really turn him up, whereas Garcia's message is much more diverse, it's much more widespread. It might work better in a general election, the runoff, but he's got to get there.
And Shia, you wanted to jump in here?
Well, I was going to say, I think both Johnson and Vallas have a similar, they're approaching their base in a similar way. Those people are going to come out no matter what, whereas Lori Lightfoot and Chuy Garcia, people may like them, they might vote for them, but they aren't going to go out rain or shine. There's a little bit of different energy
and
there.
if you do have a Johnson and Vallas runoff, you seem to have polar opposites, complete opposite message here.
Yeah.
Very interesting choice. But Mariah Woelfel, given the record amount of mail-in votes here to be counted, is it likely that we won't know who at least that second person is going to be on Tuesday night?
I think that that's a chance. I think the Board of Elections will have tens of thousands of mail-in ballots to count after, or to sift through after the day of voting. So if it's a few hundred thousands of votes in between a second and third candidate, it might take a couple days.
Well, and certainly we're not going to know a lot of those ward races by Tuesday night.
Right, and there's a lot of contentious ward races. We shouldn't forget about that, but there are too many to cover here in a half-an-hour show. Meanwhile, Sarah, the CTU, that is a group that is trying to finance some of those ward races, and we know that they're backing Brandon Johnson. They've come under fire for loaning $415,000 to its PAC, its political arm. The election board said, well, you can't do that. That's not within the law. So they said, whoops, our bad. It's not a loan. It's actually a donation of aggregate member dues. A bit of an unforced error here on the CTU's part.
Yeah, I mean, I know that, you've done some reporting that there's quite a few CTU members that aren't happy about this. I mean, they don't want their union dues. I mean, there's also I think the biggest complaint is there's a lack of transparency.
Well, they were saying that they didn't get to vote on it, that the union just made this decision to transfer their dues over there, and they found out about it after the fact.
Right, look, that union, there's a lot of teachers out there, and, I'm sure they all don't support Brandon Johnson.
27,000 plus members, close to 30,000 members. It's not a monolith, even though their message is usually pretty unified when they speak out publicly.
Yeah, I think the question of whether this moves the needle in terms of Johnson's support is maybe a good one to ask, but I'm not sure it makes a difference. The people who were supporting Johnson and who were foot soldiers for CTU have done the work to get him to where he's at now. But I think it does raise the question of if Johnson is number 2 on Tuesday and makes it into this runoff, does CTU have the money to keep funding his campaign if they're taking out a loan or, trying to come up with cash to get him to this runoff? And then, too, if he gets to the runoff, they may have more questions to answer about shifty funding.
I think he'll have the money, particularly if Vallas is the opponent. You will see union money from all over the country come in against him because they don't like.
And don't forget the National Teachers Union is pouring in a lot of money.
Yeah.
Although CTU dues go to those groups as well.
True. Right.
I mean, Greg Hines, it is just a handful that we spoke with. The Chicago Tribune spoke with some other members. I spoke with more on the phone that were afraid to speak out because they were afraid of what leadership is going to do to them. Is there a mini revolt here against the leadership of the CTU, or they still have pretty ironclad control over that organization?
I think the CTU may, to some degree, be returning to form. Traditionally, before the last 10 years or so, this has always been a very divided union. Their leadership fights were knockdown dragouts. There were factions within factions. In recent years, it's been kind of put together, and it papered over a lot of that. Maybe we're just returning to the way it was before.
Meanwhile, you have the FOP as well trying to back certain races in campaigns. They, of course, endorsed Paul Vallas. When you see these major public unions, FOP, CTU, trying to wield too much power, so much power, might voters be worried that's too much power here? I mean, these are the folks that have to protect our city and teach our kids.
I definitely think if you would talk to parents, CPS parents, they would say yes. I mean, I think that a lot of CPS parents are upset about that they've lived through several strikes, through COVID, that, they're not sure they want to have somebody who's in the mayor's office that is being supported by the union. So I think that from that end, from the police end, You know, I'm not sure.
You know, I think you're right, but I blame us in the media for this a little bit. The union is doing what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to get stuff for its members. It's supposed to be mean and nasty and drag it out. But we've kind of let them get away with this message that what's good for the CTOs, what's good for Chicago, what's good for Chicago is good for the CTOs. No, they're not synonymous, but we let them get away with that.
And maybe one could say the same thing about the FOP. Or any other big interest group that tries to, influence an election. Meanwhile, Shia Kappas, you have State Controller Susana Mendoza. She's upset that her police officer brother can't claim his full pension because he was forced to leave his job due to COVID complications. She's blasting Mayor Lightfoot for this. Were you surprised that Mendoza kind of jumped into the fray this week?
Yeah, that she did it this week, because it was an issue that's been of concern to her for a month or so, and she did it a week before the election. So that raises questions, I think.
What would be her interest in putting her thumb on the scales in the mayoral election? Because she had supported Lightfoot 4 years ago after she had dropped out.
Well, maybe she has an issue with the city being run the way it is. I don't know. I do think doing it a week before was a political statement, even though she is making it a legislative issue. And I think the legislative issue is interesting, but the timing of it raises a lot of questions.
And Mariah Lightfoot is saying, well, this is a decision by the police pension board. I can't go in there and tell them what to do. Is that a fair argument there?
Well, there are many mayoral appointed boards in the city of Chicago, the Chicago Transit Board, the CPS board, the pension board that, some will say Lightfoot controls behind the scenes. She said that it's an independent board, that she did not tell them, as Mendoza alluded to deny the disability benefits.
And did she say it held up in court, too? So it was the courts.
It is being appealed, but a judge agreed with the pension board's decision.
Yeah, you got to figure that anybody who's smart enough to get on a mayoral board is probably smart enough to figure out what the boss really wants.
Well, interesting issue this week. Interesting that Mendoza jumped in. In some other news this week, members of the City Council Public Safety Committee blasted police brass for not firing officers tied to extremist groups. Take a look.
If someone today said, I am a member of the Oath Keepers, I am a sworn member of the Chicago Police Department, I acknowledge that, could their tenure be terminated? Could their position in CPD be terminated?
No, sir.
No.
So, Mariah Woelfel, this is a question that seems to have come up for many weeks now, and it hasn't been resolved. The Inspector General has said, yes, CPD can fire at least one of these officers, Mr. Baker, that had ties to the Proud Boys. CPD keeps saying, no, we can't. Why not?
CPD says it didn't have enough evidence to prove that he lied about anything else, about, going to a Proud Boys barbecue. That the only evidence they have is that he lied about being interviewed by FBI officials. But I think the statements have been conflicting, and city council members were left more confused after the hearing.
Did anyone get any answers from what the police department said?
They're trying to go by the letter of the law, of the way it's written, when the Inspector General is saying you can use common sense, and they were part of that group, so of course you can dump them.
So the Inspector General...
and the Inspector General has said that CPD ignored documents that would have shined a light on his ties to the Proud Boys.
So why is the Inspector General so confident that CPD can take this action and CPD is just holding on like this?
Well, you have to ask Joe about it, but I think there's a feeling that for good policing requires the cops to get along with the people they serve. And if the cop involved, the police officer involved, has views that are abhorrent, is wearing a veritable white sheet of sorts, it's going to make it impossible, frankly, to have the relationship with the community you need to be effective as a police officer.
And this comes as law enforcement groups are warning about this so-called day of hate. Does anyone know where this came from or why this is bubbling up as an issue right now?
Well, this is, I believe, a threat in Iowa by hate groups declaring tomorrow a day of hate. So police officer, specifically an anti-Semitic movement, and CPD officers are warning residents to move with caution, but saying that there's no viable threat. But the two headlines coming in the same week of take care of yourselves. We condemn hate, but also having to deal with really tough questions by City Council asking why you haven't, taken more than, the action of suspension against a member of your own brass who's been, tied to hate groups. I think it's an interesting
juxtaposition. Let's move on to some other news this week. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis spoke in Elmhurst to police officers. New court documents reveal that Mike Madigan's confidant, who's on trial, was questioned twice by the FBI. And former Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger has a book deal where he'll expound on his break from the GOP over the January 6th siege of the U.S. Capitol. Let's get to that DeSantis visit. Shia Kapos, why did he bring this quote-unquote anti-woke roadshow to Elmhurst?
It was visit 3 in one day. He visited New York, Philadelphia, and the Chicago area just to pitch himself. It's a preview of what we can expect of him running for president, even though he's not saying that. But I think this is they're trying to get revved up before the 2024 campaign.
And his whole speech seems to be that schools are too quote-unquote woke, law enforcement is too quote-unquote woke. Do these things resonate here?
Hey, listen, if you want to, resonate here is not the point. Resonating with the Republican base is the point. If you're running for the Republican nomination against Donald Trump, you got to be tougher than tough. What better way to show that you're a true believer than to go to blue states and have people scream and yell and throw rocks at you, and then you go back to the base and say, see, I'm your guy.
Well, this is also kind of, aimed at Pritzker, too, right? I mean, because Pritzker is a potential presidential candidate. Who knows? It could end up being eventually both of them. So, I mean, this is kind of taking a shot at Pritzker
and it does seem like Pritzker's trying to position himself as the anti-Ron DeSantis on a national stage. Is that a successful tack for him?
Yeah, I think Governor Pritzker has said numerous times he's not going to run for president. He supports Joe Biden completely, but he is loud and clear that he does not want Ron DeSantis in the White House. He does not want Donald Trump in the White House. He just told Bloomberg that he's going to do what he can to make sure that those folks don't get in the White House. So that means he's going to have a big voice, I think, during the 2024 campaign, whether he runs or not. He'll be out there speaking. He'll be out there pushing against the Ron DeSantis or Trump and their anti-wokeness.
And someone that did come out pretty quickly against DeSantis and his message was Paul Vallas when this announcement first kind of came up. Do you think that disappointed some of the folks in Mount Greenwood or Norwood Park or Edison Park that are firmly in the Vallas camp?
Well, it certainly disappointed some conservative commentators on Twitter who said some nasty things about now we know where Paul really is. I think Paul is trying to walk this line, like we were talking about before. He wants to keep conservatives with him, but he also wants to broaden his appeal to less conservative parts of the city. Going after DeSantis in his case was an easy target. Yeah, it may hurt him with a few conservatives, but even John Cass is a pretty conservative guy, was suggesting that, well, wink, wink, we know what Paul was doing here. He had to just beef up his bona fides with people who weren't very conservative.
People at that DeSantis event were irritated, though. As they came in, they were all grumbling that Paul would speak out that way, saying, why did he even say anything at all, if that's what he thought?
And where most of them live, they live in the suburbs.
Well,
right, exactly. I was just going to say, what do they care?
I also feel like Paul Vallas has some room to split from some FOP, actions and words, in which he has. He said he doesn't agree with the sentiment that John Catanzaro, when he compared a COVID-19 vaccine mandate to Nazi Germany. He's been able to do that because his lane is less crowded than the people to the left of him. And so if he hurt some feelings of people in Mount Greenwood or some more conservative wards, I mean, he's still potentially the best choice for them with the FOP.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to vote for him anyway. So.
All right. Well, and our minds are squarely focused on this election. But meanwhile, Greg Hines, the Illinois Elections Board is taking an action about the previous election, specifically related to Darren Bailey and then the radio commentator Dan Proft, who also, in his side job, ran this political action committee that supported Darren Bailey.
Yeah, if you remember all the nasty Pritzker ads about crime, the saying Chicago's going to hell in a handbasket and you can't walk out the street, well, they were all pretty much run not by the Bailey campaign, but by this PAC that Dan Proft had going. Now, in theory, this particular PAC was an independent expenditure. They're not supposed to coordinate with or consult with Mr. Bailey, who benefited from him. But Proft had Bailey on his radio show any number of times, and they talked about what? Get crime, exactly the same kinds of things, and lo and behold, Dan gets a bunch of money from Dickie Lyon, the billionaire from Wisconsin, and runs these ads. So the question is, does this constitute illegal coordination or not? The election board took a look at it. They said, well, there's enough there. We're going to take a real look at it. We'll find out.
That they might have colluded a little bit, because the Supreme Court has been clear these independent expenditure groups are not supposed to have any kind of coordination with an actual
right,
campaign.
and I'm sure the counter to that is going to be what the lawyers said so far, that, hey, it's free speech. Everybody knew the crime was going to be an issue in Chicago, so it's no surprise that Proft's ads talk about it. Still, when you have the two principals talking and then the ad comes out, it does raise some questions.
All right, well, you hopefully answered a lot of questions tonight for our viewers, but we are out of time, so our thanks to Greg Hines, Sarah Schulte, Mariah Wolfel, and Shia Kappas. And that is our show for this Friday night. Join us tonight at 10 for Chicago Tonight. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and see you in about 2.5 hours. Shia Kappas, former Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger, he's got a CNN gig now. He's writing a book. Is he cashing in on this kind of, Republican who's against his party whole thing?
He would probably say he's above that, but he is just trying to share the information. I'm sure that's how he's pitching it. He has a story to tell. I think I'm interested in what he has to say in the book.
Certainly does have a story to tell. He seems to be, other than Liz Cheney, the person in that party that broke the hardest, at least after the election, and on that January 6th panel. So it might be a lot of interesting anecdotes in there.
Well, and
But he is cashing in.
But I'm sure there's some, there's a market for that.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a proud sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused free continuing legal education for lawyers throughout the region.
From Carnegie Hall, two sensational divas got together to sing spirituals. Kathleen Battle and Jesse Norman.
When I think of a spiritual, I think of hope.
Everyone could feel what a moment it was.
Enjoy how Kathleen Battle and Jesse Norman made history through the magic of spirituals on Great Performances.
Tonight at 8 on WTTW.
Coming up at 10, police and faith leaders warn the community ahead of this weekend's Day of Hate, how the top contenders in the race for mayor are faring, and the FOP zeroes in on city council races with cash and flyers, all on Chicago Tonight.
Chicago, the Mecca, the hub of gospel activity.
This is a very serious problem. Don't make it funny.
Like something out of hell. It was just unbelievable.